We just finished a TruBlu investigation into the wildly popular gaming platform, Roblox. We found that it's a playground for predators. Men will go on there and try to exploit children.
Welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. Our guest today is Chris Hansen, investigative journalist and the host of Have a Seat with Chris Hansen and the Predators I've Caught podcast. Chris spent nearly 2 decades at Dateline NBC, where he created and hosted To Catch a Predator. Today, he continues to run sting operations alongside county sheriff's offices across the country, and his new documentary, Dangerous Games, investigates child safety failures on the gaming platform Roblox. You know, I deeply appreciate, actually, that you spend your time personally and professionally looking for predators. I wish there was more people who dedicated their life's work to what you do. And then on the other side of that coin, it's disturbing to think that even if more people did, I don't know if it would solve the problem. You know, it's kind of like it's plugging holes in a dam, which we have to have, that there's that upstream issue of why predators are predators in the first place.
I think you're exactly right, Andy. And I think, you know, if you'd asked me 22 years ago when we started doing these predator investigations, how long this would last, I would have told you, you know, maybe we'll do it 3 times, 4 times. Then who's going to show up? Who wants to be embarrassed, notwithstanding the fact that they're facing serious criminal charges? I mean, I never conceived this as something that I would do for, more than half of my career as part of, my repertoire of reporting. I mean, it was conceived as a one-time investigative story using hidden cameras to alert parents to the dangers their children face online. It was a one-time thing for Dateline NBC. I pitched it that way. We rented a house in Bethpage, Long Island. We didn't even have law enforcement involved, Andy. We didn't know what was going to happen. We partnered with an online watchdog group called Perverted Justice, which was doing this sort of work in the space. And when they caught somebody, they would merely post them on their website. Now, if law enforcement got interested, they would help. They did some training with law enforcement, but I figured if we could partner with Perverted Justice and use their ability to be decoys and our ability to wire a house with hidden cameras and microphones, it could be pretty compelling. So that's what we did. Well, I'm driving out there, and I'm thinking, what if I've just blown tens of thousands of dollars of the network's money? What if nobody shows up? And, 2.5 days into it, we caught 17 guys, including a New York City firefighter. Now, he was prosecuted because of who he was. The FBI got out of the case and he pleaded guilty and got, punished. But the other 16 guys were in the wind. Nothing. We did it again outside Washington, D.C. in Herndon, Virginia. Even more guys showed up. We had a doctor. We had teachers. We had military guys. We had a rabbi. We had a guy who walked in the house naked. Again, no police present. Now, Fairfax police did prosecute. The FBI did prosecute probably half of these cases. The military prosecuted one of them too. But it became clear after that we had to change the way we were working. We had to collaborate with law enforcement. And this was a little controversial in the journalism world because I was criticized for working too closely, but it was the only socially responsible way to proceed. And so we partnered with the Riverside County Sheriff's Office in California. Sergeant Chad Bianco, now sheriff and gubernatorial candidate Chad Bianco, headed the investigation with his sheriff's department, and 51 guys showed up in 3 days. So we continue to work with law enforcement, and we've adapted over the 2 decades we've been doing this to collaborate in a way that ensures a successful prosecution. Yes, it's compelling television, of course. It is interesting for people to be taken inside the investigation, to see a felony committed in real time, to see this guy face me and justice, and then to see him arrested and prosecuted. You don't see that in very many places. So it's a compelling trio. And yes, there's a dark, humorous part to it. And yes, I play into that. But I think the overarching theme here. And the goal is to create awareness, to understand how these guys think, to expose them, to try to create some sort of deterrence. And yes, there is entertainment value to it. And we have a streaming network called TruBlu where these takedown investigations drop every single Thursday. And we do a lot of different things on that platform, but this is our premier show. And people continue to be engaged in it. I hope it's got a deterrent value. I know it's got an awareness value. And I know law enforcement across the country continue to be interested in collaborating with us because every month, it seems, Andy, we take on a new law enforcement partner around the country. And it's very fulfilling work for me. It takes some energy. You gotta do your push-ups, gotta stay in shape. But it's something that, I didn't set out to make a franchise out of, but it is. And now I need to make sure it keeps going.
Yeah, well, I definitely don't want you to stop. Ladies and gentlemen, hot salt from Firecracker Farm is the real deal. It's not just heat, it's flavor that elevates everything that you cook. The best thing to happen to food since fire. That's a bold statement. But I'm going to go ahead and agree with that. It's delightful. One of the best things about this brand is there's a real person behind it. His name is Alex. And he makes these in small batches, so it's not always easy to get. You don't want to miss out. All of the flavors are great. I have tried all of them. You really can't go wrong. Seriously, try it on everything. Steaks, vegetables, everything in between. If you like milder heat, mix in some sea salt to dilute it. This is a choose your own adventure. You can go direct from the push button dispenser, or you can dilute to hit that flavor profile that you're looking for. The best way that you can help this show is to help Alex and his small family business by grabbing some hot salt and trying it for yourself. So go to Firecracker Farm and use the code Ironclad for 15% off of your first order. Alex would also like me to thank you, the audience, for giving his small business a shot. I'm telling you right now, head over to Firecracker Farm, pick something out. I honestly don't think that you can go wrong. It's an amazing product founded by a very cool person. The backstory behind it is legit, and it's going to make your food taste better. You've been doing this for over two decades now. Your first person that the sting was somebody in an AOL chat room, I was trying to explain to my children in their 20s what this is. What is MySpace? Yeah, what is Yahoo? Well. Yeah, it didn't go well. I didn't have a very good they were just, their response was, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? I'm like, listen, this was cutting edge at the time. My point being, that was cutting edge at the time. What have you seen change in those 20 years? And are you still catching the same type of person? Is it a different type of person, or is this just a record that is on repeat as the mediums evolve over time?
It's a little bit of a repeat, Andy. I mean, just in the last month, we caught a lieutenant with the Washington, D.C. Metro Police Department in Maryland, where we were doing a sting with the Harford County Sheriff's Office. This guy was a 23-year veteran, 47 years old, had been chatting for 31 days with someone he thought was a 15-year-old boy. He traveled from his home, drove an hour and a half, 2 hours to meet what he thought was a boy. And he was arrested and confronted by me. Now, this man on his day job was responsible for coordinating dignitary motorcades, including that of the president and foreign dignitaries who were visiting. So what happens when this guy gets caught, if he gets caught in a honey trap situation, and a foreign government or entity or an intelligence entity has something over him, what does he do? We caught him. I suspect it wasn't his first time. The conversation was blatant. He acknowledged that he had a lot to lose. He sent pictures of himself in his police uniform, in his police vehicle, from his police office.
Wow.
All to somebody he thought was a 15-year-old boy. They talked about sex. He sent graphic pictures of himself. They talked about traveling to Italy. I mean, this went on and on and on. And then he walks in, and this episode just dropped, a week or so ago, and meets me. And he, knowing the law, says, I'm not going to talk without a lawyer. And I said, well, you're going to listen to me for a fair bit of time here. And, he's sitting there with his sunglasses on. We'll get you some video if you want to see it, if you haven't seen the piece already. And He's pretty smarmy, pretty arrogant, but he's finally caught. We had a guy in Florida 2 weeks ago, just one of 18 or 19 guys who showed up, who was the local Santa Claus. This was in Polk County with Sheriff Grady Judd. And I looked at the picture during the chat and was talking to the detective, and he had a white beard and white hair. I said, boy, that guy looks like Santa Claus. And the detective says, yeah, he sure does. And he spins his computer around, and a detective from across the room sees it and says, that is the local Santa Claus. He's been in my home with my children on his lap. 68 years old. His wife played Mrs. Claus. And he is negotiating with somebody he thinks is the father of a 13-year-old girl willing to sell that girl for sex. He's talking about money. He meets on a park bench near a shopping mall. He's arrested. And I'm interviewing him, and I'm not letting on that I know everything I know. And he admits that this is wrong. He talks about meeting other people online, but not another child, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, I can't help but notice that you look a lot like Santa Claus. And he leans over to me and says, I am Santa Claus. I mean, this was the guy at the bakery, at the parade. He did everything. He had a business, and he worked in community services. He had been a pastor for 40 years. And then his poor wife, whom he has to call, has to put out an email to all their Santa customers saying, due to unforeseen circumstances at the North Pole, we won't be doing our Santa business this year. We can recommend some others. And that leads to the collateral damage. But I'm firmly convinced, and obviously everybody's innocent until proven guilty, that this guy would have gone through with it. He had worked himself up to this fantasy and had somehow given himself the blessing that it wasn't a bad thing to do. Last week, we're in Martin County, Florida. Sheriff John Budenseek. We had a guy show up for an underage girl. He was carrying a pistol when he walked into the house. He didn't pull it on us. He wasn't threatening, but, we're in a state that's easy to carry a pistol. We get out. It turns out his cousin, quote unquote cousin, is waiting in the car for him. And they pop the trunk, and there's 4 assault rifles in there. So what happens, and again, all legally owned, right? I get it. I'm all about the Second Amendment. I understand it. But when somebody mixes their privilege to carry a weapon into one of these volatile situations, it becomes, dangerous. And Andy, you asked about the state of these investigations and the internet areas where these guys prowl. There has been an explosion in the platforms upon which adults can approach children. Not just these dating platforms where kids can go and be curious and be, taken advantage of and exploited, but you talk about games that are meant for children.
Yep.
We just finished at TruBlu an investigation into the wildly popular gaming platform, Roblox. You may be familiar with this with kids.
Very familiar with it. I had children who were navigating on that.
But
yep.
We found that it's a playground for predators, and that men will go on there and try to exploit children. We've had kidnapping cases. We've had cases. A guy just pleaded guilty in Florida a few weeks ago. He was getting children to getting kids to do things to their siblings, to their friends, and send him the pictures. I mean, it's and these characters on Roblox, they look like Lego figures. So the parents think, oh, they're safe. And if they're properly watched and governed, you can keep them safe. But they make contact with these people. There's a currency called Robux that can be used to exploit these kids. And they get them off into Discord for a different conversation. And that's the wild, wild west. And that's why, something like a dozen attorneys general across the country have sued the company. They've settled multiple multi-million-dollar lawsuits just in the last couple of months. But it was important to get into this and to show this to get parents' attention, that these places can be prowling grounds for predators looking to exploit your children.
Yeah, Roblox is an interesting one. I've hosted, there's a company locally called Deliver Fund that is an anti-human trafficking organization.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them, yeah.
So I've had Nick on a few times. The last time we were on, we specifically spoke about Roblox, and we pulled up some very interesting footage of the CEO loosely talking about security parameters and almost loosely admitting, my words, not his, that he was aware that this was an issue, but almost describing it as if it was an unsolvable issue, or leveraging the fact that they have moderation tools and parental controls in place, which it's my understanding you've tested those. And I'm curious, what was your experience with those parental controls and safety tools?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And to Roblox's credit, they did implement age verification and facial recognition. Those are good steps. Nobody can argue that. But kids know how to get around that. Predators know how to get around that. And my question is, if you're that committed to safety of children on your platform, why not let law enforcement conduct investigations on Roblox? Why not put that out there and let them do that? You know, and they refuse to do it for a lot of different reasons. I had several phone calls with the press people at Roblox, as well as their chief security officer. I had one call with him as well. And I, was begging them to do an on-camera interview, and they refused. And I think for two reasons. They said that they didn't want to take part in a quote unquote hit job that involved the Louisiana Attorney General and a young man named Schlepp, who is an activist, who was a big Roblox developer at a young age, who was exploited himself, that put him on the verge of suicide, and he became an activist exposing predators on Roblox. And they don't like him. They could have brought him on board and made him a part of the security solution. They didn't. So I think it comes down to arrogance, quite honestly, and fear. They don't want to sit down with me like I'm sitting with you for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, and have to answer the difficult questions. Roblox likes to go on live TV for 2 to 3 minutes where nobody's going to be able to go that deep. Or they'll sit for an hour with somebody from the tech world who they can manipulate, right? They don't want to sit down with me. They don't want to sit down with you. If they will, you should do it.
Yeah.
I'll give you.
I don't think they would sit down with me. I think they probably put me on the adversarial side of the fence.
I think you're probably right, but they're afraid to do it. And there's a bit of arrogance here too, because I believe that their position is, we created this world. We're smarter than the rest of you, and we know what's best. We know how to run it. And it's a massive multi-billion-dollar business. And that's fine. I'm all about capitalism. I own a network. I have podcasts just like you. I get it. I understand how it works. But you have a responsibility to do the best you can to keep kids safe. And it's my belief, based upon our investigation, and I tell everybody out there who sees this, they should watch it. Go to TruBlu, and it's called Dangerous Games. It's a 2-hour documentary. And I'm already working on follow-ups on it for part 3.
D-Day will be the largest seaborne invasion in history.
Group Captain Dr. James Stagg, here at the request of General Eisenhower.
Do we have a date yet for the invasion zone?
We invade France on Monday. Fate of the war. Thousands of lives hinge on this. I need a forecast.
We are faced with 2 aggressive storms.
Have you looked out a window lately?
If we delay, the enemy will slaughter every single one of us.
The final decision on the timing of D-Day will be mine alone.
We must face the facts, however frightening they may be.
300,000 men with families that they may never see again. Why should I trust you?
Because the wrath of nature is real.
We'll accept nothing less than full victory.
Fresher, the untold true story of D-Day. Rated PG-13, only in theaters May 29th.
For those who haven't heard about the documentary, but are aware of what Roblox is, can you briefly describe, and obviously this can't be ultra specific because situations can change, But can you describe largely the mechanisms that predators will use by getting onto Roblox, how they contact your children, and then how they off-platform them? Because I think even that knowledge would hopefully lead people to looking deeper into this and therefore drive them towards the dangerous games.
So there are games on Roblox. So Roblox is a massive gaming platform within a gaming platform, right? There are games you can automatically get into, and then developers can go on Roblox and create their own games. And there's a whole process for that too. So it's a multi-level gaming platform, if you will. It's like going to an amusement park where outsiders can become insiders by developing a game and getting permission to put it on Roblox. But what parents don't often see is that there have historically been games like Bathroom, where a curious kid could walk in and suddenly be exposed to avatars. Be suggestive. They can be approached by people who are way older than them. Now, again, certain safety measures have been implemented to try to stop this, but kids get around it. Kids routinely get into these areas that are potential predator prowling grounds. And the predators know this. And so once they make contact, and a predator can give a kid Robux, they can get these kids quickly to Discord, which is largely unregulated, and they can have a conversation there. And Roblox has a server on Discord. So Roblox knows this. Roblox has a hearty relationship with Discord. And then once they develop this relationship, once there's grooming, they bring the conversation to texting. And that's where oftentimes the real damage is done. We had a woman, a mother in Marion County, Florida, near Ocala, homeschooled 5 or 6 kids. The youngest was 10, still at home, and not allowed to use Roblox, but had finagled her way onto the platform using a tablet without her mother's knowledge. Now, this is a hands-on mom. I mean, she's 24/7. That's her job. Her husband's a long-haul truck driver. The rest of the kids are grown. So she's an eagle. Still, this girl was able to get on. And the woman started getting messages on an old Instagram account of hers from somebody wanting pictures, saying charged things. And the mom confronts the daughter and says, what's going on here? She says, well, yeah, this guy approached me and I'm sorry. I know I was supposed to be on Roblox, but I was. The mom starts having a conversation, keeps it going. Then takes it to the Marion County Sheriff's Office, and they investigate. Now, this Sheriff's Office happens to have one of the leading detectives in the country on this matter, who's already got an investigation where they arrested a 17 or 18-year-old guy who had a dozen victims, if not more. He was grooming online, having them send and do things to their children. So anyway, woman cooperates with the sheriff's office. They find out that the predator in this case is all the way over in the UK, and they get them busted there. The larger point here, Andy, is that here we are in Marion County, Florida, Ocala, Florida, and within the span of months, 2 major Roblox cases, different ones, one centered there, one where there was a victim in this one county. What the heck is going on in the rest of the United States? You know, we had a case in Harlingen, Texas, where a woman was married with kids. Kids are on Roblox, and the dad was on Roblox. Well, they find out the dad was grooming a 15-year-old girl in California on Roblox. Caught him red-handed. Got the chats. Called the police. Police said, well, you know, it's going to take a minute to get into this, but we'll do our best. The mom, and we have all this in the documentary, Dangerous Games. The mom goes on Facebook. You know, there's no one more intrepid on social media than an angry mom or a college-age girl. They'll find it all. You just put them to work. They'll find it all. She tracks down the girl through social media in California, figures out who it is. And we talk about this in the documentary. Finds the mom, calls the mom and says, look, this has happened. Puts the police in touch with the mom there. The girl gives a statement and the guy's arrested. So when I go to, then she reaches out to me on TikTok. You know, as journalists now, you have to be so aware and checking your different platforms because information is coming in. She reaches out and says, hey, I need to talk to Chris Hansen or any member of his team because this is what happened. I go down and interview her, get the information on the husband. He works at Sam's Club, and I'm waiting in the parking lot for him with the text that he sent this girl in California. And I confront him, give him the business. That's all in the documentary. And then he's arrested. And I didn't have time to get back down there for the arrest. I said to the wife, the ex-wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, I said, do me a favor and get video of it with your phone. She got video of the arrest with her phone. It's all in the documentary. But without this vigilant mom and the vigilant mom in Marion County, Florida, none of this is made public. There would be no justice here. And so you have to be your own advocate. I think that's my larger message to every parent who sees this, is that you got to sit down with these kids, the whole family, and say, look, I get this is a different time than when I grew up. If we wanted to look at racy pictures when I was growing up, we had to sneak into Bobby West's dad's garage, find the old box of Playboy magazines, and then sneak one out into the woods to look at it. And that wasn't even right. Today, you're bombarded by it. Even when kids don't ask for it, they are exposed to it. And they're exposed to a lot of things. Like we have a documentary coming out very soon on TruBlu. It's in editing right now. We've been working on it for a couple of years. And we talked to 4 sets of parents whose children took their own lives because they were sextorted online. Somebody a half a world away in Nigeria poses as a cute teenage girl, gets this boy to send pictures, then extorts him. And these kids are so emotionally and intellectually tied to their social media that it's the end of the world if somebody were to publish one of these embarrassing pictures. They can't get past it. What's grandma going to say? What's the college going to say? What's my girlfriend going to say? She didn't know I was doing this. It's a 15-minute crisis. And so you have to tell kids, look, I'm hoping this never happens to you. I hope you don't fall for it. But if you do fall for it, we're not going to blame the victim here, right? Come to me and we'll figure it out. We'll go to the cops. We'll go to the sheriff. We'll do what we have to do. We'll go to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They have a program where we take these pictures down. And by the way, in 3 days, it's all over. Grandma's not going to see it. Your aunt isn't going to see it. And nobody's going to care. The cycle goes by so quickly. But God, don't take your dad's gun and go to the bathroom and shoot yourself. And I've seen that. And I've had to sit across from parents who've had to tell me that story. It's heartbreaking, Andy. And so you really got to run your own show. You got to protect your own property. You got to set up your own fence. And you got to be realistic that this stuff is going to happen. The internet and all these social sites and these games, they're ubiquitous. So are the predators. So you got to get your mind right.
Yeah, it's a tough position to be in as a parent. As a parent who has children who grew up in the digital age, they will start approaching you in their early teens saying things like, well, my entire social circle is online. This is the way that we communicate. It's different than the way that you grew up, which there is, of course, an essence and aspect of truth to that. What I try to remind parents is that although your children will present to you that ideology, like this connects me to my friends, the reality is this: smartphones and the internet do more than give your child access to the world. It gives the world access to them. And if you're not your own advocate, there are organizations out there that will do their best to help you. But even in the world that you have been in now for 2 decades, you are an expert in how these systems are overwhelmed, how they're slow to move. They can respond to a crisis often, but they're probably not going to be able to prevent one. In the event that they are able to prevent one, that's probably anomalous, not the norm. So you have to be your own first responder in this. And it's a difficult conversation. And I have friends who would tell me, well, my children don't have a cell phone, so they're okay. And I will say to them, do they have a single friend that has access to an electronic device that you are not monitoring or that person's parents are not monitoring? Because the answer to that question is yes. They have access to the world and the world has access to them.
By the way, they can go to the library, they can go to Starbucks, they can go, any number of places to get access. And outside of this apartment here in New York City, there's going to be internet access. And it's everywhere. You just have to be aware and be realistic that you can be there. I mean, look, internet service providers are mandated by legislation to report incidents of adults sending inappropriate material to children and making inappropriate contact with children. Right? They're supposed to have filters to find that, and Congress has mandated that they report that to the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, which refers those cases to law enforcement around the country. And that system works. For instance, in Marion County, Florida, the case where the young man was exploiting all the children, he recently pleaded guilty. That was a NCMEC referral. It worked. But not everything gets to NCMEC. And when you try to implement safety measures on these platforms, you limit engagement. And when you limit engagement, you limit profits. And so, these companies are very willing to come testify in front of Congress. We'll do it all. We'll do it all. We'll do it all. 6 months later, it's all watered down because they've spent millions of dollars on lobbyists to prevent the limitation of engagement. Engagement is money to these companies. And again, I'm not being anti-capitalist. I'm just saying you have a responsibility. If you build the amusement park, you better make sure that roller coaster is safe. Buckle up.
I agree. There's another frustrating aspect of this as well. And again, you're probably a front row seat to this. And that is watching district attorneys declining prosecution on cases where evidence is clearly overwhelming. And I'm curious your thoughts as to why that happens. Is this a matter of the system has too many things outside of this that they're dealing with? Is it a lack of interest? Is it everything in between? What could be more frustrating to a parent than seeing that happen?
Yeah, in my experience, I don't see a lot of district attorneys turning down these cases. I know there are cases where some of the YouTube predator catchers have found bad guys, but because of the methodology, it has made prosecutors squeamish for a couple of different reasons. Either chain of custody of evidence, or they beat the guy up or pushed him around, or were exploitive, or they couldn't ensure the integrity of the communication of the chat, which is why we use law enforcement chatters. So there isn't that issue, right? There's no chain of custody of the chat. There's no verification of the chat. When we started, we had perverted justice decoys do the chat. For the most part, that worked out well, but there were a couple of cases where defense attorneys were questioning the integrity of the chat and wanted the servers, and they didn't want to give up the servers, and it became controversial. Well, now we don't have that issue because the chatters are affiliated with law enforcement. We get copies of the chats, but they have them, right? So there's no chain of custody problem. In most of our cases, we're at a 99.1% prosecution rate. Rarely does a case get kicked. And I see some frustrating things where in some areas, prosecutors are overwhelmed by violent crimes, and they see this as a sting where there's no victim. And if the predator doesn't have a criminal history, they are more likely to enter into a plea bargain that involves probation and some term of registration as a sex offender. Now, there are those who would argue that's not enough, that everybody should go to prison. In Louisiana, for instance, even if you plead guilty, even if it's your first offense, the district attorney there in In Livingston Parish, at least, Sheriff Jason Ard's position is you're doing 5 years. Mandatory minimum 5 years on a plea, because that's their attitude. In Florida, we've had cases where guys have been caught who also had CSAM, and they were given a 10-year plea deal. Plead, get 10 years. They told the prosecutors to go pound sand. They got convicted, and the judge gave them life in prison. Should have taken the plea, son. So in my experience, and I know what you're talking about, and there is a sense of frustration. And I'm dealing with a case now, in South Carolina, where a guy who was a softball coach groomed and exploited a child, 13, 14-year-old, and he got, 200 days in jail. But it turns out there's a whole other backstory, and, that's pretty light for what he did. And so we dig into those cases when they come our way, when we can find justice for people. When these are interesting stories and compelling stories, and there's a lesson there. So, we dig into those, either on the podcast, the Have a Seat podcast, or Predators I've Caught podcast, or on TruBlu. But in my cases, I generally see prosecution. Sentencing, it varies on state to state, but prosecution, almost always.
In the sting operations you've done, have you ever rolled up the same person twice?
It's interesting because in this last investigation in Martin County, Florida, there was a guy who surfaced in a previous sting. We weren't on it, but it was a previous sting conducted by the Martin County Sheriff's Office. And he didn't show up. He chatted, but he didn't show up, so he didn't get arrested. He shows up in this one, chats, and then he showed up. So yes, we've had him show up a couple different times. We had one guy in Riverside, California, who showed up, and then he showed up again in Long Beach. We've had a lot of examples where they chat in one but don't show up, but they get the guts to show up in the next one. So it happens. We had one guy who showed up naked in Virginia, sent him on his way. This is before we had law enforcement. He turns up the next day in a different chat room with a different 13-year-old boy, decoy, and sets a meeting at McDonald's. We took him off there.
Yeah, I ask because I wonder about recidivism. You have sat and confronted these people. I'm of a mind where I think some things for people, they're broken, or it's a pathology or an addiction, and getting caught, especially if the penalty is not something that they would consider to be life-altering, they're not going to stop. Or if they're not locked away for life, they're not going to stop. So I'm just curious, having sat down in front of these people for 20 years, what are you seeing similarity-wise? I'm sure the occupations span the gamut.
Well, they all say it's their first time. They all say it's their first time. They've never done this before. If they have met somebody in a chat room, it's been an adult. If there's been a liaison, nobody is doing this for evil purposes. They all are good Samaritans. They're just going to help the girl. We had a guy show up in Martin County last week, young man. And people always ask, do you ever feel sorry for these guys? Sometimes you do feel sorry for the young guys. It's like, God, what are you thinking? If your dad, you'd slap him upside the head and say, get your mind right. But this guy had thought this through to the level where he was going to try to convince me that he brought money. He created a realistic scenario because he thought it was his mission in life to rescue girls who are in terrible situations. I said, that's not the way to do it, son. Call 911, call the sheriff's office. This is not a way to be a good Samaritan. I think he was lying to me. But he went so far as during the interview to call his father. And again, we talk about the collateral damage, Mrs. Santa Claus, all these other people who've got to deal with this now that the guy's been caught. And, the poor dad gets on the phone and I said, hi, it's Chris Hansen. He goes, what's going on? I said, well, your son's been caught in a sting operation. The sheriff's office is going to give you a call and you can sort it all out and you'll be taken to the county jail. And the rest of it's, it's the sheriff's business to take care of it after that. And he starts yelling at the 19-year-old, deservedly so. But imagine that phone call. And so I think you're right. I mean, I think the tendency in our society, Andy, is to want everybody should go to jail for life. There should be a drug that fixes them, or, one size fits all solution. That's what we want, because that's the easiest way to deal with an icky problem. The truth is, they're not all the same guy. And I'm no shrink. I'm not qualified to judge how these guys got there or who they are. But I can tell you that, having talked to, hundreds of them over 22 years, they break down into three basic groups. There's the hardcore predator. No matter what, he's going to do it again. No matter how many times you catch him, he's going to go after a child. There's the young guy who is socially inept and thinks that this is my chance. I can get with a 13 or 14-year-old girl, and at some point, if it works out, we'll be, close enough in age, so it won't be a problem. It's a fantasy. And then there's this guy in the middle, the cop, the doctor, the guy who's got a lot to lose, the executive. And they've been fantasizing about this for a long time. They've been looking at perhaps CSAM. We see these CSAM cases all over the place. It's just horrible. And they get to a point where the images don't do it for them anymore, and they have to fulfill the fantasy, and we see them knocking on our door. Now, this is a more complex guy. Does 5 years in prison, does that fix him? He gets out and he, is a registered sex offender. He's got a report. At least we know where he's at. And we can't lock everybody up forever. But if you talk to, law enforcement guys like Grady Judd or, Jason Ard or, Chris Swanson in Michigan, I mean, they'll tell you that a lot of these guys can't be fixed. And it's frustrating for them when they see a light sentence like probation and a short term of registration on the sex offender list.
Do you ever encounter female predators?
That's a great question. We've never had a female predator show up in one of our stings. And the therapists, the psychiatrists tell us that it's because when you talk about female predators, you're more likely to see the teacher-student scenario.
Got it.
They don't like the anonymity of the interaction. They want to know their prey, their victim. Whereas male predators get off on the anonymity of it. They want it that way. So you're more likely to see it there. But we've never seen one. We've had guys chat and say, I'm bringing my wife or my girlfriend for a threesome, but we've never seen them actually show up. So we don't know whether that was just, fantasy role playing. And we do see some fantasy role playing. We do see guys who talk about it all and don't show up. These chatters, God bless them, they may talk to 100 different people, in a couple-day investigation and have, 3 or 4 of them show up. It's a grind, these people. It's right up there with the folks that have to, determine what's inappropriate material.
Yeah, the
ICAC
crowd.
I don't know how they do it.
I don't either.
I've never seen it, and thankfully, I hope I never do. It's horrible.
This episode is also brought to you by Norwood Sawmills. Norwood Sawmills builds portable sawmills for people who don't just want to own land. They want to do something with it. Whether you're clearing timber, building your homestead, or running a serious operation, Norwood gives you the ability to turn raw logs into real value on your terms. And don't just take it from me. Listen to Eric Lindros, Hall of Famer and one of the most dominant power forwards in NHL history, talking about what he's doing with his Norwood mill after hockey.
There's a feeling of pride by just, you got your stickers and you're loading up your wood and you're trying to dry it out and you're just taking it off the ladder and bringing it over to your pile. And it sounds so basic, but it gets me going.
That's what Norwood is about, giving people the tools to keep building long after the game changes. You can watch Eric's full story on Norwood Sawmills' YouTube channel or hit the link in the show notes to request a quote. Thanks again to Norwood Sawmills for partnering with Change Agents and the Ironclad Network. I have some friends that work in the ICAC world, which is Internet Crimes Against Children. And fortunately, one of the beauties of technology, they can use some AI shielding programs that allows them to reduce the mental and psychological burden of being associated with those things. Having said that, not a single one of them has described the job as being easy or not damaging to your psyche in the long term because you were just soaking and navigating through the detritus. But do you think,
Oh no.
yeah, it's bad. Do you think law enforcement is keeping up with these evolutions in platforms and technology, or are they constantly playing catch up?
Well, I think there's a sense of catch up, but they're trying. I see far fewer cases where something happens to a child online and the parent goes to the local law enforcement and they say, we can't do anything about it, go to the FBI. I mean, every police department, every sheriff's office now has, an officer, a deputy or detective, if not a whole unit dedicated to this. So you will get some justice. Now, whether they can find the guy, sometimes it's more complicated, but they'll give it a good go. I mean, I don't get a lot of emails from people anymore saying we went to our local police department and they told us they couldn't do anything. They're doing something. They're committed. And I tell you, I've been blessed knowing hundreds and hundreds of law enforcement people in my 44-year career. And people who are involved in this, people who are tied to ICAC, people who are tied to crimes against children and to CSAM. I mean, they're dedicated like, no other. And they make these things happen. I mean, I'm with them on these stings, and they go for, 3 days on the short side and 7 days on the long side. And it's every day, every night, sometimes till 6:00 in the morning. And they don't want to stop. They don't get tired. They don't complain. They're out there to do this mission. And it's something that we should all support and be very proud of.
I agree. Chris, how do you maintain any hope for humanity, given the amount of time that you have spent directly with these individuals and exposed to this subject matter? I would have a hard time not having
well, you
it
do
mold.
You got to protect yourself from getting so dark and so such a thick skin that you don't have humanity over it. And that's, I talked earlier about having a dark sense of humor about it. I mean, I think that's helpful. I mean, and I'm mindful of that. I understand that's why, some people watch it. I also think it's helpful to me to have a dark sense of humor. The cop, there's this lieutenant squirming around in his handcuffs, right? He doesn't want to talk to me, and I'm not going to let him off the hook. I'm going to make sure this encounter goes at least 20 minutes, just because that's justice. And at one point, I say to him, he's got his Prada sunglasses on. I said, do you want me to take your sunglasses off for you? He goes, no, I'm okay. And he's weaseling around in the back. And I said, do those cuffs hurt? No, I'm okay. I said, you're a long way from being okay, sir. But look, I'm good at compartmentalizing like you are and were when you were doing your job in the Navy and like these police officers are. I get to walk away from it at the end of the sting.
Yeah.
I follow up on the cases on my podcast, but I don't have to go back through the chat. I have to go through the chats to do the interview with the bad guy, but I don't have to live with those chats, right? I go back through them again when I do the podcast version of what's happened to this guy. I don't have to go to court. I don't have to prep a district attorney to go to trial. I don't have to be involved in the negotiations for a plea. I get to walk away from it. The real heroes are the guys in law enforcement and the guys who volunteer, like the Child Rescue Coalition in Florida, which has this amazing technology that can track in real time. And I've had these folks on the podcast and I do some fundraising for them, but they can track in real time, and these guys who get caught with, they want to make it like, it's just pictures. It's nobody being victimized. Well, every time an image like that is viewed, it's the re-victimization of a child. Yeah. It's just as bad in my world, in my opinion, as physically abusing a child. And routinely and universally, if you talk to somebody like Michael Burke, who is a renowned psychiatrist who works for the U.S. Marshals, who goes into prisons and interviews these guys, routinely and virtually without exception, there was a correlation between offenders viewing CSAM and committing these crimes. So don't think for a minute that just because, it's an AI generated image or it's just a picture It's going there because ultimately predators are not satisfied with looking at it, fantasizing about. Ultimately, given enough time, I can predict without fear of contradiction that they will offend. That's just the way it is. That's the way their brains work.
Chris, to be respectful of your time, one more question for you today. The question is, what advice do you have for parents who have children who are going to be raised in this type of environment?
The best advice I can give, Andy, is to not be intimidated by the technology, right? The best advice I can give is not to be intimidated by the technology. You may not understand Roblox. You may not understand any of the other games they might be playing, but you can create an open environment where they can come to you and report a problem. And you have to tell them, I think, that the likelihood of somebody approaching you, making you uncomfortable, is real. And so if it does happen, I'm not going to punish you, but you got to come to me so we can fix it before it goes too far. You see these guys out there and they're troublemakers, and you should be able to have fun and play these games and communicate with your friends, but you got to be careful. And I also warn parents about posting too many pictures without protections on their own accounts, because these guys, these predators, do randomly search around looking for their type, especially when it comes to some of these stage moms who like to create money-making, revenue-churning accounts for their daughters and their sons. I mean, you got to be careful with that. You don't put them out there. Be protective. They have plenty of time to have their digital footprint and to have their digital identity and use it for productive commerce. But don't rush into it. But they gotta be able to speak up at the dinner table and say, look, this happened. They got to be able to walk in your bedroom and say, look, I'm uncomfortable with this. And you can't freak out. When I was growing up, anything happened, my dad would solve it by yelling at you, so you didn't create the problem again. What we did was just keep doing what we were doing and not tell them, So you gotta let them tell you that there's a problem, and then together you can solve it. It's good team building, But that's at its most basic level. That's it.
It's fantastic advice. Chris, thank you so much for what you've done over the past 20 years. I have been a fan of watching your work. And I was going to say, I hope you don't have to do it anymore in the future, but unfortunately, I think you're stuck because it is what it is. The problem is real, and I know we're working towards a solution, but I think continuing to highlight it, this is one of those things where you just
I think talking about it is the first best step, right? We're creating awareness. So I appreciate you, and thanks for having me on. Thanks for your service to our country, and we'll chat again.
Sounds good. Have a great one, Chris. I was going to say, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'm not sure that is the correct terminology given the subject matter. Perhaps let's just say, hopefully it was an eye-opening experience for today. If you want to watch Chris's new documentary that we mentioned multiple times, it's called Dangerous Games, and you can find it on TruBlu. That's TruBlu. Thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. See you all next week with an all-new guest and an all-new episode. See you then.